Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is a really teaching-focused journey into one of Scripture's most foundational and, frankly, uncompromising texts, Psalm 53.
That's right. And we're using some fantastic sources, primarily the really powerful and insightful commentary from the You Need Faith in Jesus team.
And the goal here is to pull out those essential nuggets of knowledge, about human nature, the divine perspective, and really the whole architecture of salvation.
This is definitely more than just a summary. We're embarking on an extraction of some essential, hard-won wisdom. I mean, this psalm delivers a profound diagnosis of the human heart. And
Right.
our goal is to make sure you can move beyond just a superficial reading to really grasp the core theological truths that this ancient text demands we understand and, internalize.
And what makes this text so immediately arresting is its duplication. We're doing our deep dive into Psalm 53, which is almost word for word the same as Psalm 14.
Right.
That duplication, that insistence on saying the same thing twice, it's like a flashing signal that the message is foundational, it's critical, and it's meant to be unforgettable.
It really is.
And it challenges us with a truly timeless question. What is the absolute root cause of moral failure in humanity? And how exactly does the creator of the universe view that failure?
Well, to truly set the intellectual and spiritual stage for this instruction, we have to start where our sources from the You Need Faith in Jesus team guide us.
And that's the heading.
That's the Psalm's own blueprint.
Yeah.
Heading, the King James Version heading reads, "To the chief musician upon Mahalath Mashil, a psalm of David."
Okay, that sounds like pretty dense, ancient liturgical jargon. So let's break it down for you listening today. What does the instruction to the chief musician really tell us about the original context?
It immediately tells us this wasn't intended as, say, private meditation. This was highly structured public liturgy. The chief musician was the lead worship director. He was the person responsible for arranging, performing, and instructing others on the exact application of this composition.
So it signifies authority, a public intent.
Absolutely. This song was structured to be taught and sung to the community.
Okay, so that sets the conductor's role. But what about the specific musical instruction that follows? That word mahalath seems really central to the mood.
Mahalath is one of those elusive Hebrew terms that scholars have debated for centuries. But the consensus, which is reinforced by the You Need Faith in Jesus team commentary, is highly illustrative.
So what's the general idea?
It likely refers to a specific tune or a meter, maybe an instrumental style, but the root word suggests sickness or sorrow or weakness.
Wow.
Therefore, the musical setting for the psalm was intended to evoke seriousness, sadness, maybe even mournfulness.
Which perfectly fits the theme we're about to explore.
It's a perfect fit for the comprehensive spiritual sickness and corruption of humanity apart from God.
So, if the music is somber and it's reflective of human brokenness, then that final term in the heading must confirm the intent of the lyrics. We're talking about mashil.
Indeed, the term mashil is definitive. It literally means instruction or to make one wise.
So it's different from other psalms.
Very different. It sets it apart from other categories like a tehillah, which is a song of praise, or a mizmor, a common musical setting. A mashil is explicitly pedagogical.
It's a less...
It forces you, the reader, into a position of learning profound truth and then applying it. So by engaging in this deep dive, we're consciously following the psalm's own mandate. We're here to become wise about the nature of our hearts and, ultimately, the need for divine rescue.
That context is just so vital. We're diving into a solemn, intentionally instructive song about our greatest weakness. Okay, let's turn to the content itself and unpack this central definition of foolishness, which, as the You Need Faith in Jesus team commentary insists, is not intellectual. It's spiritual and moral.
Right.
We're turning now to verse 1, the core diagnosis.
And the psalm begins with a diagnosis that is, well, it's blunt, it's absolute, and it is universally relevant. Let's quote the verse fully, as it's provided by the source material.
Please do.
The King James Version says, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. Corrupt are they, and have done abominable iniquity. There is none that doeth good." That's Psalm 53, verse 1.
The moment we hear the fool, we really have to check our modern assumptions, don't we?
We do.
We think of low intelligence, maybe somebody who struggles to grasp basic concepts. But the psalm is clearly aiming at a much deeper failure.
It is entirely a failure of wisdom, and in biblical terms, that means a failure to live according to divine truth. The Nabal, that's the Hebrew term for fool,
Eh.
he isn't lacking in IQ.
Right.
He's morally bankrupt because he willfully denies reality. And the source material really emphasizes this rejection of God isn't just some academic footnote in a dusty philosophy text.
It's a decision.
It's a decision made in the heart, the Hebrew leb, which encapsulates the center of desire, volition, morality, and consciousness.
So it's a willful rejection, and it's positioned right at the core of their identity.
Precisely. It's a choice to orient one's entire life around a false premise.
The premise being the denial of God.
The denial of divine accountability. If you choose to say, there is no God, you are essentially claiming there is no ultimate standard above myself. And that is the very essence of spiritual foolishness.
And the psalmist immediately connects that internal choice to external moral decay, this heart decision, this spiritual atheism. It's never benign, is it?
Never. The commentary highlights the immediate consequences. They're described as corrupt in their character, and they engage in abominable iniquity.
That term, abominable iniquity, it sounds deeply loaded.
It is. It speaks of wicked actions that are morally repugnant, deserving of utter disgust. The foolish premise, the denial of the Creator, it dictates the foolish outcome.
Which is what?
A life lived in profound moral sickness. And that perfectly reflects the suggested tune of Mahalath.
And David's conclusion in this verse is massive.
Right.
There is none that doeth good. I mean, that is a sweeping condemnation of humanity in its natural state.
It is.
So how do we reconcile that with moments of, apparent human kindness or genuine philanthropic effort that we see in the world?
And that tension is where the wisdom lies. The You Need Faith in Jesus team commentary clarifies that good here has to be understood according to the Creator standard.
Okay.
A human action can be beneficial to society, but if it originates from a heart that denies God's existence or his authority, it ultimately fails the test of divine goodness.
So it's not good in the sense of being perfect or righteous before God.
Exactly. It just highlights the universality of this spiritual sickness.
And to bring this idea forward, the source material draws a crucial connection to the New Testament, which really solidifies this diagnosis as the bedrock of Christian theology concerning sin.
That's right. The Apostle Paul, in his comprehensive theological argument to the Romans, explicitly mirrors and expands on David's logic. Well, Paul describes the downward spiral that begins with that initial choice of the heart. The King James Version in Romans chapter 1, verse 21 says, "Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened."
Wow, that parallel is chilling. Paul confirms that the refusal to honor the Creator, the refusal to live thankfully under his authority, which is precisely the position of the fool who says no God in his heart, that leads directly to darkened, corrupted thinking.
The darkness is the consequence of the denial. Paul says their imaginations become vain, meaning empty or worthless, and their heart becomes foolish, mirroring the psalm exactly.
So David saw it in his time.
And Paul defined it as a universal theological law. Rejecting the standard leads inevitably to a rejection of morality and truth.
So what's the practical implication here for us? If we translate this wisdom for you listening today, the core message is that our foundational belief about God, or, our active choice to disregard him, is the defining factor of our entire character.
And the You Need Faith in Jesus team provides a very firm reminder on this. Rejecting or neglecting the Creator fundamentally removes the objective foundation for goodness.
It's a foundation issue.
Totally. If you remove the vertical dimension, which is accountability to God, then the horizontal dimension, morality towards people, it just collapses into self-serving chaos.
So we have to recognize that the deepest root of our own personal shortcomings, it's not my environment, it's not my education.
It's the lingering presence of that fool's heart that defaults to self-sovereignty.
And that lack of foundation sets the stage for the next dramatic turn in the psalm. We move from the internal description of the fool to the external active assessment by God himself.
Yes.
This is where the perspective shifts from an earthly diagnosis to a divine inspection.
And what's fascinating here is that immediate move from the state of corruption to God's active involvement. He isn't distant or uncaring.
No.
He is proactively observing and evaluating the entirety of mankind.
So let's hear that second verse. What is God's searching gaze specifically fixed upon?
The verse states, and this is Psalm 53, verse 2, "God looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand, that did seek God."
The imagery is so stark. God looks down from heaven from a position of absolute sovereignty upon the children of men. I mean, the whole of humanity. It's an evaluation being conducted from the ultimate standard.
Yes, and the object of his search is crucial. He isn't looking for flawless execution of moral laws.
Okay, so what is he looking for?
He's searching for two things: understanding and seeking. And the commentary defines spiritual understanding here as the active recognition of his reality and his authority.
And seeking.
And seeking is defined as actively orienting one's heart and life toward him.
So he's looking for a specific spiritual posture. He's not asking if they're perfect, but if they are genuinely trying to turn toward him, if they're moving away from the fool's default position.
That is exactly right. And the gravity of this divine inspection is reinforced by the historical context the "You Need Faith in Jesus" team commentary provides.
Meaning this isn't the first time God has done this?
It is not the first time God has conducted this sobering assessment of the natural human condition.
And that parallel points us directly to the period before the flood, which is maybe the most comprehensive divine evaluation ever recorded.
Exactly. We're reminded of Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, where the initial assessment led to a world-altering judgment.
What does it say?
The King James Version says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually."
That parallel is devastating. It tells us that Psalm 53 isn't just describing some unusual temporary diff in human morality.
No.
It's describing the consistent, unwavering spiritual state of mankind when left to its own devices.
And verse 3 delivers the comprehensive, grim results of that heavenly search. Let's look at the totality of the verdict. Psalm 53, verse 3 says, "Every one of them is gone back. They are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one."
The language here is just absolute. It's almost redundant for emphasis. Every one of them, altogether, none that doeth good, no, not one. It leaves zero room for self-exoneration.
This is the intentional demolition of human pride. Gone back suggests this deviation, a turning aside from the path they should have taken.
And altogether become filthy.
That phrase uses highly charged language. It suggests profound, comprehensive moral and spiritual decay, like contaminated water or something utterly spoiled and unusable. It's a full system failure.
That verdict, none that doeth good, no, not one. That is maybe the most difficult concept for the natural, self-justifying mind to accept.
It is.
It seems to invalidate every positive effort we see around us.
It does, if we don't understand the standard. And the You Need Faith in Jesus team sources emphasize this isn't a sociological observation, it's a theological one.
So why is it so important?
This passage is foundational because it establishes the need for salvation. If we could achieve goodness on our own, if even one person could manage it, then the entire structure of the good news would be unnecessary.
Which leads us directly to why the Apostle Paul, the great systematic theologian, anchors his entire argument on this verdict.
Absolutely. Paul takes this passage and he quotes it directly in Romans, demonstrating that David's ancient observation is the universal theological truth of mankind.
Can you share that quote?
Yes. It's from Romans chapter 3, starting in verse 10. The KJV says, "As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one."
The weight of that quote is just immense.
Yeah.
Paul uses this masterful psalm to prove to the entire civilized world that everyone, regardless of their background or ethical effort, is condemned by their own natural condition.
And the implication for you, the listener, is profound. The You Need Faith in Jesus team stresses that this truth has to demolish any lingering pride. We just cannot appreciate the depth of the remedy, Jesus Christ, until we fully agree with God's uncompromising diagnosis of our condition in Psalm 53, verse 3.
We can't save ourselves.
We can't save ourselves. We cannot make ourselves genuinely good.
But wait, let's pause here. That's a powerful claim, and you might naturally push back. If we accept the premise that none doeth good, how do we, in a practical sense, differentiate between the fool who explicitly says no God and, say, the self-professed believer who still struggles profoundly with sin and selfishness?
That's a crucial, reflective question.
I mean, aren't they both fundamentally corrupt in the scriptural sense?
Yes, in a sense, both are subject to the universal verdict of verse 3. The difference lies in the remedy and the orientation that we found in verse 2.
Okay.
The fool rejects the standard and the seeker. The struggling believer, on the other hand, having accepted the diagnosis, has turned to the remedy, which is Christ, and is now engaged in the spiritual seeking that God looks for.
So the struggle is there, but the direction has changed.
Exactly. Sin remains a battle, but the foundational status has changed from condemned and rejecting to forgiven and seeking, and that dynamic is central to the entire arc of the psalm.
That clarification really helps maintain the necessary tension. Okay, let's move to where this internal state manifests externally. David transitions from the fool's heart to the external predatory actions that follow, and he expresses a kind of astonished outrage.
He describes the action that results when the fool's premise is lived out. Let's look closely at verse 4. The King James Version of Psalm 53, verse 4 says, "Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my people as they eat bread. They have not called upon God."
David's rhetorical question. Have the workers of iniquity no knowledge?
It just screams astonishment.
It does.
They act as though they are completely ignorant of justice, of consequences, of God's authority. Their wickedness isn't born of these deep, complex plots, but rather willful, ignorant blindness.
And the imagery used to describe their oppression is shocking in its casual brutality.
Who eat up my people as they eat bread.
It implies consuming destruction. They don't oppress with great thoughtful effort. They do it routinely, effortlessly, and without any moral reservation. It's the same casual thoughtlessness one applies to consuming a daily meal. So it's ingrained, predatory, automatic cruelty.
Exactly. It's the difference between a planned strategic attack and just simply swallowing what is readily available because it serves your immediate appetite. It speaks to a deep normalization of wickedness.
Yeah.
But then the You Need Faith in Jesus team commentary pinpoints the absolute fundamental mechanism that enables and sustains this predatory behavior.
Yeah.
It's in the second part of the verse, and it defines a condition that is far more pervasive than outright philosophical atheism.
And what is that?
Practical atheism.
That's the critical insight here.
Yeah.
The fundamental issue is identified as prayerlessness. They have not called upon God.
This is where the root of the fool's heart from verse 1 is externalized. Philosophical atheism says, I believe there is no God. Practical atheism says, I might believe in God, but I live my life as if he is completely irrelevant, unneeded, and has no authority over my decisions.
So when they eat up my people, it's because they're living as though accountability simply doesn't exist.
That's it.
That concept of practical atheism is just so intensely relevant to us today. We live in a world saturated with information and self-help systems that actively encourage self-reliance and downplay the need for divine intervention.
It's everywhere.
So how do we see this practical atheism manifesting today, even among people who profess faith?
Well, it manifests as living entirely within self-generated systems. For example, relying completely on algorithms or data for every major life decision, or treating all your financial resources, your professional success, your personal security as solely the product of your own effort.
I see.
The failure to call upon God daily, genuinely, consistently, that's a dangerous drift.
So a lack of prayer isn't just a failure of piety, it's an active declaration of independence from the Creator.
It's an active declaration that the heart, that center of desire and will, is still fundamentally self-sovereign. And the commentary reminds us that this spiritual weariness, this neglect, is something God rebuked even his own people for.
Right, let's reference that external source from Isaiah.
We see that similar idea of neglect in God's rebuke to his own people. It's in Isaiah chapter 43, verse 22. The King James Version says, But thou hast not called upon me, O Jacob, but thou hast been weary of me, O Israel.
So whether it's the predatory wickedness of the fool in Psalm 53 or the spiritual exhaustion of God's own people in Isaiah, the root problem is the same.
The same?
Failure to engage in that consistent calling upon God, which signals reliance and dependence.
And the practical application is this. A life that consistently calls upon God is the only real sustainable defense against the encroachment of iniquity and that pull towards self-sovereignty. Prayer is the active daily confession that the premise of verse 1, there is no God, is a lie, and that the verdict of verse 3, there is none that doeth good, applies to us, requiring constant grace.
So after outlining the oppression and the audacity of the wicked in verse 4, the psalm executes this massive dramatic pivot in verse 5.
It really did.
This is the divine reversal, a swift, overwhelming shift in power executed by God himself. This is the assurance for God's people.
It is the moment of vindication. The oppressed are delivered, and the oppressors, the workers of iniquity, are utterly defeated. Let's examine the powerful promise in verse 5. Psalm 53, verse 5 says, There were they in great fear where no fear was. For God hath scattered the bones of him that encampeth against thee. Thou hast put them to shame, because God hath despised them.
The first phrase is just psychologically devastating.
Huh.
There were they in great fear where no fear was. The arrogant, self-assured oppressors who were casually eating up God's people are suddenly seized by a supernatural panic that has no logical earthly trigger.
It is God inserting himself into the battle space. This fear is a decisive internal defeat before any external action even happens. It's the terror that arises when the fool, who denied God in his heart, suddenly encounters the terrifying reality of God's immediate sovereign judgment.
And the physical image of defeat is just total. God hath scattered the bones of him that encampeth against thee. That's not a temporary setback. That is complete annihilation.
In the context of ancient warfare, to have your bones scattered signified a total, humiliating, and irreversible destruction. It meant you were defeated so thoroughly that you weren't even afforded the dignity of a proper burial.
The victory's complete.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They are put to shame because by opposing God's people, they have incurred God's own contempt. God hath despised them.
And the You Need Faith in Jesus team commentary helps us make this promise tangible by connecting it to a historical event where this kind of supernatural reversal actually occurred.
That's right. That historical event is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verses 22 and 23. It describes the defeat of the Ammonites, Moabites, and others attacking Judah.
And what's the core insight from that story?
The reference speaks of a time when the armies attacking Judah were struck with such confusion from God that they turned their weapons on one another.
Wow.
And it resulted in their mutual destruction. Judah won the victory without ever having to lift a single weapon against the enemy. That is the magnitude of the supernatural panic and total defeat promised here in Psalm 53.
And this moves the promise beyond just historical warfare to a powerful spiritual assurance for you listening today, especially when you're facing opposition for your faith in what can be a hostile culture.
The message is an assurance of divine security. When we face spiritual or worldly opposition, our ultimate vindication is guaranteed, and it rests entirely in God's sovereign hand.
So our security isn't in our own ability to strategize or retaliate or fight back.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's in his power to bring utter confusion and defeat to those who oppose his righteous will.
We transition now to the climax of the psalm, concluding this mashal not with destruction, but with a deep universal longing for ultimate peace, restoration, and deliverance.
It is the necessary conclusion. It transitions from the diagnosis in verses 1 to 3 and the immediate intervention in verses 4 and 5 to the ultimate hope. And verse 6 is this powerful prayer for final restoration.
Let's hear.
The King James Version of Psalm 53, verse 6 says, "Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion. When God bringeth back the captivity of his people, Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad."
The focus on Zion is really key here. Zion represents Jerusalem, the dwelling place of God's presence. So the prayer is specific.
It is. It's that salvation must originate directly from the seat of God's authority and presence. It's an acknowledgement that only God can fix the universal problem that was diagnosed in the opening verses.
And the phrase, bringeth back the captivity of his people.
That sounds multifaceted.
It is. While David was certainly praying for the physical release from historical or future exiles, the You Need Faith in Jesus team commentary emphasizes the deeper spiritual meaning.
And that is?
A total restoration from the bondage of sin and oppression that resulted from the fool's heart.
So it's not just a change of address, it's a change of spiritual state.
Precisely. And when this final, complete salvation arrives, the psalm promises a result of universal and overwhelming joy. Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. This isn't just temporary happiness.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate perfected joy of a people fully reconciled to their Creator. And this ancient prayer finds its definitive answer in one person, connecting that Old Testament longing to the New Testament reality.
The commentary emphasizes that this ancient prayer finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ. The long-awaited salvation did come out of Zion.
And we see that fulfillment beautifully articulated right at the beginning of the New Testament narrative, years after David first wrote these words.
Yes. We look to Simeon's prophetic declaration in the temple, which is recorded in Luke chapter 2, verse 30. Upon seeing the infant Messiah, he says, "For mine eyes have seen thy salvation."
So Jesus is the salvation that came out of Zion.
He is. He provided the spiritual release from the captivity of sin.
For the believer today, then, while we have experienced the joy of this initial release from sin's captivity through faith in Christ, we still kind of echo David's cry, looking forward to a final universal culmination.
Absolutely. The You Need Faith in Jesus team reminds us that we live in the already but not yet. We possess salvation, but we still wait with blessed hope for the second coming of Christ.
The moment when he visibly returns.
Yes, to finalize the complete restoration of all things, redeeming the physical world and ending all oppression. And that visible return will be the day of ultimate rejoicing promised in verse 6.
This has been an incredibly rigorous analysis of the text. I mean, moving from diagnosis to divine remedy. We've established the universal diagnosis of sin, the remedy which is salvation out of Zion, and the divine protection promised to those who seek him. So now, let's make this Mashal Psalm truly function as instruction by translating this wisdom into concrete, actionable steps for you, the listener. And we're drawing directly from the insights provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. This is the section you call the most crucial, so let's dedicate the necessary depth to it.
Moving from theology to practical action is the mandate of a Mashal Psalm. We have 4 core steps derived from the structure of Psalm 53.
Okay, let's start with practical step 1, which addresses the foundation in verses 1 and 3. Conduct a heart check. What does this look like in daily reality, beyond just a quick moment of reflection?
Well, this requires rigorous, almost painful honesty. The action is to take an honest, daily inventory of your core belief system and actively reject the premise of the fool's mindset.
That choice to live as if God were irrelevant.
Exactly. And the You Need Faith in Jesus team stresses that you must acknowledge the universal truth. Self-righteousness is an illusion.
But how does one conduct this heart check without immediately falling into, paralyzing guilt or self-condemnation, especially given the uncompromising verdict of none that doeth good?
That is the essential tension. The heart check is not a self-flagellation exercise. It's a redirection exercise. You look at your actions and attitudes over the last 24 hours and you ask, where did I choose self-sovereignty over dependence? Where did I seek my own counsel rather than God's wisdom?
I see.
The moment you agree with the diagnosis, I am incapable of genuine goodness apart from Christ, you immediately turn to the remedy. The check should lead not to condemnation, but to immediate repentance and a deepened appreciation for the finished work of Christ.
So it forces you to remember salvation is a gift, not a reward.
Exactly.
So the goal is to fully agree with God's assessment of our condition from Psalm 53, verse 3, on a daily basis, to ensure that our appreciation for the gift of salvation remains fresh and profound. It's like an antidote to spiritual complacency.
It is. It demolishes the pride that allows us to drift back toward the fool's heart.
Okay, let's move to practical step 2. This addresses the root cause of oppression in verse 4. Commit to consistent calling. We identified prayerlessness as practical atheism. So how do we make the commitment to prayer genuine and consistent, and not just some ritual?
The action requires identifying specific areas of practical atheism in our lives. So if you're facing a major financial decision, are you spending 3 hours researching investment strategies and maybe 3 minutes asking for God's wisdom and guidance?
That's a great example.
If you're in a relational conflict, are you relying solely on your emotional intelligence, or are you actively calling on God for patience and wisdom?
The challenge for us today is that we often equate control and capability with moral goodness. Consistent calling seems like an act of vulnerability and dependence, which, the world discourages. It is the ultimate act of surrender. A consistent pattern of genuine prayer means acknowledging reliance in those domains where the world tells us we must be self-sufficient. And the You Need Faith in Jesus team insight here is crucial. You must actively confess and call upon God daily, specifically in the areas where you are relying entirely on your own strength. If we live as if God is irrelevant to our career, our finances, or our health, that domain is functionally ruled by practical atheism.
So calling upon God reintroduces divine authority into that specific area.
It does. This sounds like a preventative measure. Consistent calling is the real defense against the creeping influence of iniquity. It is the daily surrender of the heart's sovereignty to the Creator. It's the constant negation of verse 1. Okay, let's tackle practical step 3, which relates to God's search back in verse 2. Orient your life towards seeking. God wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for a heart oriented towards Him. So how do we ensure our lives reflect this intentional seeking in the moments when no one else is watching?
This is all about intentionality in the private life. The action is to recognize that your life is lived before an all-seeing God, which means true seeking happens in the intentions, the thoughts, and even the consumption habits of your heart.
Like what?
What are you reading? What media are you consuming? What are you dwelling on during your idle moments?
And you listening might ask, How do I know if I'm genuinely seeking or just going through the motions to feel better about myself?
That's a fair question. The You Need Faith in Jesus team reminds us that this active seeking demonstrates spiritual understanding. Genuine seeking involves active study of the source material and an alignment of your priorities.
So when faced with a choice,
The orientation of a seeker asks, what decision honors God's standard, even if it costs me comfort or advantage? It's a sustained, intentional effort to live as if God's presence is immediate and relevant to every mundane detail, not just Sunday morning. The seeking heart values wisdom over personal convenience.
finally, practical step 4, which is drawn from that powerful divine reversal in verse 5, rest in divine security. When we face genuine opposition or spiritual warfare, how do we practically put this rest into action?
The action is a decisive shift in reliance. When you're facing opposition for your faith, you have to resist the urge to panic, to self-vindicate, or to rely on your own resources to fight the battle. You must consciously and confidently place your security entirely in God's sovereign power to bring confusion and defeat to those who oppose his will.
That is so counterintuitive, especially in a competitive, results-driven world. If someone is attacking our reputation, our first instinct is to aggressively defend ourselves, not rest.
And that is the difference between earthly panic and divine peace. Relying on our own strength implies we doubt God's ability or his willingness to defend the righteous cause. The promise is in verse 5, the scattering of the bones, that's God's work, not ours.
Right.
When we choose to rest, we choose to trust the timing and the efficacy of God's intervention. This confidence frees us from the exhausting burden of trying to defeat enemies that are far too powerful for us. We trust that God defends his people and that he will ultimately expose the fool's heart and put them to shame.
This has truly functioned as a mashal, a comprehensive instruction designed to make us wise. We've covered the heart of the fool, the sweeping assessment from heaven, the crime of practical atheism, the promise of reversal, and the hope fulfilled in Zion, all thanks to the deep commentary provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team sources.
What stands out after all this exploration is the starting point of wisdom, understanding the depth of our own need as brutally honest as verse 3 demands. This deep dive should challenge you to accept that foundational assessment. If the rejection of God is the source of all moral corruption and iniquity, then actively seeking and consistently calling upon him is the only path to true goodness and spiritual health.
And the final verse, that longing for the salvation that comes out of Zion, connects David's hope to our ultimate future. Since our ultimate universal joy is tied to the final, visible return of that salvation, Jesus Christ, this leaves us with a provocative closing thought to mull over.
Go on.
How does living in the certain, guaranteed awareness of that blessed hope, the promise of total rejoicing and restoration, fundamentally change your day-to-day actions, and the urgency with which you approach the heart checks and the challenges of consistent calling described in the source material? Something profound to consider as you reflect on this wisdom.
Thank you for joining us today for this essential, deep exploration of the source material. We hope this Mashil Psalm has provided essential instruction for your life and deepened your understanding of the universal need and the sovereign remedy.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the knowledge that matters.